On this episode of Assignment Discovery, their songs echo through the oceans. They speak a language we can only hope to understand. Join Roger Payne as he journeys through Patagonia to be in the company of whales. Learn how pollution is destroying whales' immune systems and threatening their existence. Find out how mankind can save these magnificent creatures. And catch the latest information for educators on the video bulletin board right after Assignment Discovery.
The following program is part of Cable in the Classroom, a service of the cable television industry and your local cable company.
Now, study and discussion questions for In the Company of Whales, Part 1. What characteristics do researchers use to identify individual right and humpback whales? What type of behavior in whales is correlated with intelligence? Discuss how toothed whales communicate differently from baleen whales. Explain the different ways whales use sounds. Assignment Discovery now presents In the Company of Whales, Part 1.
In 1967, a group of American scientists working from a small boat off Bermuda began to draw some fascinating conclusions about these strange sounds from the sea. They were led by Dr. Roger Payne, who already knew that this alien oratorio was being produced by the great humpback whales. They come here to mate and give birth to calves, who thus spend the first weeks of their lives immersed in the songs of their elders.
During that exciting first season, I listened to the seemingly random calls of the humpbacks and slowly realized that they were repeating themselves in long, complex patterns of sound. They were singing.
You begin to feel the motion of the boat and realize that all the swells that are lifting and falling are actually setting the rhythm of the song. It's a kind of experience which is more wonderful than anything I know that's ever happened to me in my life.
Roger is a trained musician, and when he compared the structure of whale songs with human music, he found he was dealing with the most elaborate, non-human vocal displays ever discovered.
Like a human singer, when a humpback whale repeats his song, he breathes in such a way as not to disturb the rhythm. Humpbacks seem to have an overall concept of their song in mind. It suggests they're conscious of their performance.
For Roger, this is much more than a set of musical revelations. It changed the way he thought about whales, elevating them to something much more than animals. It was the beginning of an all-encompassing passion for whales and a desire to be in their company for the rest of his life. He found a place to do that almost at the end of the world in Patagonia. There is a bay here, utterly isolated, alive with right whales, the rarest baleen whales in the world.
The land here is the raised floor of the sea, and it's littered with whale bones, millions of years old. I first came down this track, which leads to the beach, in 1970 to build a field station from which to conduct a long, benign study of right whales.
How are ya? How long has this visit going? Good to see you.
Petrels, shearwaters, and albatrosses revel in the high winds that give these latitudes the name Roaring Forties. Patagonia, in fact, owes its remote, pristine status to its wild weather. The winds dominate everything here. This productive ocean supports tens of thousands of seals and sea lions. It's too dry for trees. In fact, only bushes survive. But an abundance of strange creatures is adapted to these conditions, like this guanaco. It's a sort of a lowland llama which is adapted to its semi-desert climate.
To this untouched paradise, where the animals almost no fear of people, Roger came every year, bringing his family with him.
Each year, the focus of our work is an aerial census on right whales in the bays of Peninsula Valdez. The right whale's head is adorned with a pattern of distinctive white patches of raised skin, which are called callosities. These markings are photographed to identify individual whales. In 1990, we used for the first time an ultralight aircraft to take pictures. We now recognize over 1,000 individual right whales by their distinctive markings, and we've tracked them all over the place, as far away as 1,500 miles. The year's photographs are brought back to the Whale Conservation Institute in Boston, where my colleague Vicki Roundtree spends the winter months identifying the whales. There are 5 different populations of right whales in the South Atlantic. Each group follows its own migratory route.
This next one is a white-marked calf. It's the calf of whale 7175, and here it is right next to the dock in Puerto Piramides, and she always seems to have white-marked calves.
Using techniques invented in Patagonia for the benign identification of whales, Roger and his team began to turn their attention to other long whale migrations, hoping to build a map of those areas which are vital to their survival. Humpbacks, for example, who they had learned to identify by their distinctive tail markings, make an annual journey to remote parts of Alaska having swum all the way from Hawaii. The ultralight aircraft was shipped up the American continent and strapped to the cabin of the whale research vessel, Crusader.
Our pilot and I took it on a test flight to see if it had survived its 10,000-mile odyssey, and, hopefully, to find some whales. We certainly had found whales, so we went back for the camera. And as we made our approach, not quite the landing we'd planned. Although the ultralight didn't survive the crash, we did, and we continued our search for the whales. In the last hours of the expedition, we got a report from a fishing vessel that there were humpbacks group feeding near him. With the help of a helicopter, we observed this extraordinary ritualized feast in which the humpbacks are engulfing whole schools of fish with jaws which can open to a distance of 15 feet. These whales are fishing cooperatively, and it's according to an intricate game plan. The lead whale is always the same individual, as are the whales to its right and left. In fact, they're playing positions. It's just like people on a team. Cooperative group behavior like this is probably the closest thing we have to evidence of mind in these animals. The most comfortable place on any boat is lying in the bow nets. It's as if you're being carried along in its outstretched arms, while beneath you there are dolphins riding in the bow rails. It's the closest you ever get to these animals when they're behaving naturally. It's a skill which they seem to have learned from riding the bow waves of whales. And the whole masterful performance seems to be choreographed with a series of whistles and clicks. Dolphins are the smallest whales. Their largest relative is the sperm whale. Sperm whales are creatures that can reach 60 feet in length, and they have the largest brain which has ever existed in the history of life on Earth. There are two kinds of whales in the world, those with teeth and those without. The family with teeth includes dolphins and these sperm whales. I've studied sperm whales in several parts of the world, and I'm particularly interested in how they use sound to communicate and to hunt.
As a young scientist, the first experiment Roger did was to toss insect-sized pebbles into the flight paths of bats and listen to their echolocation clicks as they dove on them.
So instead of pebbles, I dropped large rocks in front of sperm whales and listened to their clicks, which are nothing but a slowed-down version of a bat's sonar. We could hear hunting clicks from the whales, but whether or not they were directing them at the rocks, that remains to be determined. Dr. Jonathan Gordon is studying the clicks of sperm whales from his boat, Song of the Whale. He's trying to count the number of sperm whales in an area by listening to their clicks. They may also use the clicks to keep track of each other.
What is the sort of the regular sound that we're hearing now? What's that?
Yeah, I think what we're hearing now is whales diving deep, making their feeding dives. And these regular clicks are just, well, we think they're just a sort of broadband general echolocation. And every so often, I think we just heard one now, it's a creak.
Oh, yes, I heard that. That's right.
I think that's them actually homing in on a prey object, or at least using a finer form of echolocation.
Oh, that's neat. And what about the other day when we had whales around, we heard something that went rapidly, sort of... What was that?
Well, I think these more rapid clicks are, again, just a form of echolocation. We often hear those when a whale's up on the surface and investigating the boat. Or if you're swimming, you'll see a whale coming directly towards you, and it will make these rapid clicks.
You don't think that's aggressive, then?
Well, I think if they were behaving aggressively, they'd certainly make that noise. But we hear it all the time when they're not behaving aggressively.
Sperm whales can descend to depths of over a mile. It's here in the abyss that sperm whales catch their prey, including 2 species of giant squid. There's a theory that sperm whales can make sounds of high enough intensity to stun their victims. These sounds are appropriately called gunshots. A colleague of mine was once knocked backwards by a blast of sound from a sperm whale calf. Who knows what such a sound from an adult might have done? Although I've seen every species of large whale, I had never seen a bottlenose whale. It's a bizarre species. They get up to 39 feet in length, and the only thing we know about them is that they occupy specific stretches of ocean floor. So to find them, we set sail to a specific latitude and longitude in the North Atlantic. And when we got out 130 miles, right where I'd been told they were, there they were.
These whales live in a murky world beneath the water. They have a world which is very like the fog, where there could be another whale just beyond their field of view, just as there could be a ship beyond ours. We use radar to detect that ship, and these whales use sounds with which to detect each other.
What little we know about this species strongly suggests that bottlenose whales live in long-lasting social groups, which is a behavior that's highly correlated with intelligence. Elephants, people, and many dolphin species are an example. Because of this and the inquisitive behavior of this species and its obviously tight social bonds, I'm led to believe that this may be the smartest whale of them all. Humans have never brought to extinction any species that occurred worldwide, but we came vanishingly close with the right whale.
Whaling became a crucial part of the American commercial and industrial revolution. Whalebone, or baleen, was the springy plastic of its day. Sperm whale oil lit a world which had yet to refine petroleum, and early forms of fine machinery were lubricated with it. Only the bone, blubber, and oil were considered to be of value.
American whaling ships hunted over all oceans and founded great fortunes for New England. Returning with the oil from a single whale could recoup the full cost of sending out a ship, and many came home with 40 times that amount. Early this century, when these scenes were filmed, life aboard a whaling ship was incredibly hard and took men from their families for several years at a time. It took many of them to a watery grave because there's probably not a man in these pictures who knew how to swim.
Whaling in America spread out all over the world until it had established what amounted to whaling colonies in places like this, the island of Fayal and the Azores. The original whaling stations in the Azores were really sort of modified ships brought ashore in simple buildings like this. Here's a winch which would spin the whale in the water, removing and unpeeling the blubber. The blubber was then cut into chunks. The chunks were put into a machine over here, which would cut them into thin leaves called Bible pieces. They would take those Bible pieces, carry them over to these tripots, which were three-legged, massive iron pots that were fueled with a fire down below, made of wood at first, and then later with the pieces of the blubber which had then been tried out or the fat removed, so that the whale was actually boiling itself. And the fumes would rise from these pots up through these open roofs, out through the central section with its magnificent structure of beams, and that would be the mark of a whaling station, a great cloud of smoke rising from it at all times. As recently as 1968, when I was last here, this bay was filled with whales. There was a pool of blood at the bottom of this ramp. The gutters ran with blood which came from the whales that were being cut up above. And they were, in fact, still processing sperm whales. They would drag them on this slippery surface, which was covered with the grease and wax of the whales, over to the top here, the flensing plan, where they would then attach cables from the steam winches to the whale, pull off the slabs of blubber, cut them into sections, and lift them up on that gantry crane into the top of the building where they were processed for their oil.
With the coming of modern whaling, things got more and more industrialized. Whaling ships were equipped with flash freezers that could preserve 10-kilo blocks of whale meat caught in the Antarctic for consumption back home in Japan. The whales didn't stand a chance. But in 1975, a small organization in Canada, calling itself Greenpeace, chartered a boat and sallied forth to confront the whalers on the high seas. The whalers were in high-speed ships, so powerful that even when towing 4 dead whales, they could outdistance a Greenpeace boat. But these were determined people. The Soviets had never seen anything like it. Whale activists risking their lives to board their boats on the high seas. Some of them even drove their inflatables between the whalers' harpoons and the whales. Factory ship whaling would never be the same. The funding got better for Greenpeace, and their boats faster, until they were able to graduate to methods that were a bit more intimidating. These were signs of the time. A lot of other scientists began to get involved in the International Whaling Commission, and we began to win, big time. We even got a moratorium passed, though I don't think it will last. Whales now hold a strong grip on the collective human imagination.
And without realizing it myself, I said that I felt I really didn't want to live in a world without whales. My feeling is, no, that is too much madness.
The launch of the Voyager spacecraft symbolized this new consciousness. It carried greetings in 60 human languages to any alien who might find it. And it also carried the song of a humpback whale. The songs of whales had escaped the sea, overcome the hearts of their age-old enemies, humans, and were now aboard their spacecraft, bound on a 2.5 billion-year voyage that would carry them throughout the galaxy.
Coming up now, Answers to the questions for In the Company of Whales, Part 1. Whale researchers can identify right whales by their callosities and humpback whales by distinctive markings on their tails. Whale behavior that includes elaborate patterns of sound, close social bonds, inquisitiveness, and long-lasting social groups is equated with intelligence. Try this activity with your class. Research the migration behavior of gray, humpback, blue, and right whales. Create a classroom map and assign groups of students to plot the migration route of a specific whale. To learn more, members of the American Association of School Librarians and Assignment Discovery suggest Among Whales by Roger Payne. Ask your librarian to help you explore the many resources your library has to offer. Now, study and discussion questions for In the Company of Whales, Part 2. What jeopardizes the future existence of whales? How does marine pollution affect whales? Discuss how studying whales in the wild is different from studying them in captivity. What are the scientific advantages of observing whales in the wild? Assignment Discovery now presents In the Company of Whales, Part 2.
In the years that followed the moratorium on whaling, years that saw the fledgling conservation activists form powerful international action groups, a strange calm descended upon the world of the whales. And from this calm, a series of almost magical encounters began to take place between the human race and the whales. One of the most delightful was here in the little town of Dingle in Ireland. Soon, tourists were coming from all over the world to meet this lone ambassador from the marine wilderness. Called fungi, this animal seemed to relish all forms of company, but rejected any form of reward other than affection and physical contact.
Sheila Stokes is one of the people who first achieved contact with fungi, and in the spring of 1990, I went to Dingle to witness just how intimate this contact had become.
Down here is where you see the dolphin usually.
Great.
When we first met the dolphin, he was very cautious. You could tell he was interested because he didn't actually go away from us, but he kept a certain distance. And we spent probably 8 weekends here. We'd come for 5 days and then go back to port for 3 days and then another 5 days. And after about 8 weeks of that, he first actually made physical contact with us. He just seems to revel in human company and human interaction.
On the other side of the world, in Shark Bay, Australia, there's a little stretch of land along the coast where this same species, the bottlenose dolphin, has made extensive contact with people. If you take a boat along these beaches, you attract dolphins. This is a female who suffered an appalling sunburn. The researchers believe that while she was in heat, she may have been chased by males up onto a sandbar, where she must have been stranded for several hours until the tide rescued her. Has she come over to be touched and petted, or is she more interested in what your hand's holding? That's an important question, because in this area, the dolphins are given fish regularly. On the other hand, Shark Bay teems with fish, so free fish can't be the only attractant. These dolphins work their way into the shallows right up against the beach, and there they just hang around looking the humans over. It does look like some kind of deep curiosity, a kind of fascination with people. And thousands of people now travel all the way up the coast of Western Australia to reciprocate this fascination, spontaneously posing on the shore to be fed.
Roger had, in fact, long suspected a natural affinity between the human race and whales as a result of his experiences in Patagonia. The huge right whales here are undoubtedly attracted to people in boats. This close contact is not peculiar to these very friendly right whales. Elsewhere in the world, as soon as friendly whales outnumber the tourist boats, it is the boats that become the scarce resource, and it is the whales who start competing for them. These observations of friendliness have been made in the context of a whale-watching industry, which in the last decade has boomed worldwide. Literally everywhere that there are whales that can be watched from boats, people are going out to watch them.
In Canada's St. Lawrence Seaway, flotillas of little boats carry thousands of tourists each summer to watch the white beluga whales. Whale watching has revitalized the economies of little towns like Saguenay, and these and many other small coastal communities are thriving on whale-oriented tourism. But if you are seriously looking for the ultimate fix in whale watching, there is really only one place on Earth, the huge seas off the South Island of New Zealand, where you find lone bull sperm whales. At 50 or 60 tons, these are the largest predators that have ever existed on Earth. The sperm whale bulls come here as regularly as clockwork, the largest having traveled more than 2,000 miles from the equator, leaving behind in those more gentle climes females and calves. They are here to take part in an epic feast. Upwelling currents, striking the underwater flanks of New Zealand, bring nutrients to the surface which fuel an explosion of plant life, which in turn fuels an entire food chain which gorges itself on the abundance. And sitting on the pinnacle of this food pyramid are giant sperm whales.
Here on the coast of Newfoundland, as whale conservation succeeds, the number of whales increase, leading to direct confrontation between the whales and the fishermen. The species that caused the fishermen so much trouble is the 40-foot-long humpback whale, which needs to find enormous quantities of fish each day. Dr. John Liam, a Canadian biologist, is devoting his life to solving this problem.
There's about 30,000 fishermen that earn a living from these shores, and the productive areas are in fact very few, and whales and fishermen tend to occur in the same place, and fishermen have to put all their nets there. So in areas like this, where there's a lot of fish and so on, we're ringed with nets. This is not an ocean wilderness. What's happening to oceans around the world, and certainly in Newfoundland, is the ocean is essentially being domesticated in the same way that the prairies have been domesticated and so on. So there's lots of hazards for whales coming into these waters. And as whale populations increase, the fishermen have their nets there and facing increasing problems with them colliding with a net. You know, a net for a man to earn a living for his family costs about $5,000 to $10,000 here. This is a cod trap. He's got maybe 3 to 4 weeks to earn his whole year's living with that net. The living he makes is not big. It's $5,000 to $10,000. But if during that peak period of productivity a whale collides with a net, it's an absolute disaster for the fisherman. You can ruin his entire year's livelihood. Not only does he cost money as far as repairs to the net, but he loses this week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, where he really has to earn most of his year's income.
The conflict between the fishermen and the whales is getting worse year by year.
What I would like to see is the fishermen involved effectively in local conservation groups of some kind, where they would look after the ocean, they would protect the stocks that live there, and they would preserve it for their sons and daughters forever.
John Lean and Roger Payne now agree that parts of the world should be set aside as marine parks for whales. And in fact, by 1983, Roger had persuaded the government of Argentina to accord that status to Peninsula Valdez. Unfortunately, by the close of the 1980s, something started to happen to those beaches which would sour all these dreams of a world in which whales and human beings would coexist in a state of mutual respect. Significant numbers of whales were washing up dead here and on beaches all around the world.
It's curious that just offshore from where a dead whale lies, we often see other whales lingering. I've wondered whether these are the companions of the dead, awaiting its return or grieving for their loss. The local seagulls have been landing on the backs of right whales and pecking at their skin. This apparently harmless activity may be indicative of a far more serious problem which is facing the whales, a mysterious skin condition.
We noticed that these whales in this bay were getting a series of marks down their back. Each mark is about that size, and we believe that what they are is pox marks. Pox like chicken pox or smallpox. The problem is what we think is happening here is that these animals may have had their immune systems suppressed by poisonous toxic substances in the sea, things like PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. If that's the case, we have a total nightmare on our hands. What we have really is the equivalent of AIDS, AIDS of the sea. AIDS destroys its patients by destruction of their immune systems. And in fact, AIDS was first discovered by a skin condition in human beings. Because the pox marks could be, in fact, revealing something which is so dire, we're going to have to do something that I hate doing, which is to take a small sample from these animals. We'll just scrape a little bit of skin from the area of the pox marks and then examine it and see whether or not it's the virus we believe it to be.
Roger took samples from the corpses and others from the live whales, but the examinations he made in the rustic lab back at camp revealed little. Increasingly, however, Roger began to suspect that this lovely bay might be concealing toxic chemicals that were mysteriously poisoning the whales.
There's two things that happen as a result of marine pollution that we're starting to suspect are very serious. One is the increase in the incidence of red tides, highly toxic organisms which can kill people instantly if they eat shellfish that have these red tides.
The other is the possible diminution or reduction of the ability of an immune system to fight infection. What I'm hoping the samples that we're examining now will show from these whales is a connection between marine pollution and the presence in the whales of an ever-increasing concentration of these marine pollutants. Because in recent years, when the red tides were building, we also have started to see this sudden increase of pox marks on the whales. Something, I think, is affecting their immune systems. And I think it's pollutants, and these samples, I hope, will show that.
This is not paradise, although, as with most places where whales are found, it continues to look like it. This is the St. Lawrence Seaway, and these brown waters flow directly from the Great Lakes, the largest body of fresh water on Earth, and a notorious hotspot for waterborne industrial pollution.
I came to the Seaway in 1991 because a special study of pollution had been conducted here on these beautiful animals, a resident population of white beluga whales. Where the Saguenay River joins the Seaway, the river is 1,000 feet deep and attracts a whole variety of whales. Dr. Pierre Bellon is an expert on pollution in marine mammals.
If you look at beluga whales, what's in their tissues, it's a summary of what has happened to this environment over the last 50 years or so. The industrialization process of North America is recorded in those whales. When a farmer puts DDT on a field, it eventually ends up in soil particles. Then it's taken up by rain, and it ends up in streams, flows into major rivers, and finally ends up in a big lake or in the ocean. Now, those insecticides cannot be degraded. Living organisms have evolved on this planet to use whatever is there as food, as materials for building their own bodies. But insecticides were not there on the planet. They were built by human beings, so there is no organism that can break it down. And organisms cannot excrete them either. So whenever you ingest a particle of DDT, it will be in you for a number of years, sometimes tens and dozens of years. So you will never get rid of it. The longer you live, the more of these fish that you eat, the more contaminated you get. And that's what the story of the beluga is.
Just upriver from the beluga whale feeding grounds is the world's largest aluminum plant. Up until a few years ago, this plant used a process which dumped tons of chemicals into the environment via a forest of chimneys. In particular, a compound called benzoate pyrene. Pierre Bellon does not believe his whales are suffering from mysterious, inexplicable illnesses. The problem he believes is human-made, and it's called benzoate pyrene.
Now, benzoate pyrene is a carcinogen. It's a chemical that induces cancers in living organisms, in animals. We've done 44 autopsies of beluga whales in the St. Lawrence. Out of those 44, 18 had tumors, and half of those were cancers. Now, this is an extremely high rate, and the only chemical that we have found in beluga whales from the St. Lawrence that has a potency for inducing cancers is benzoate pyrene. The others, PCBs, insecticides, mercury, lead, cause certain health problems, but they do not cause cancers.
This is a mass stranding of whales. Whales like this get up on beaches all over the world in large numbers and die. Nobody knows why they do it. This group is a group of pilot whales, one of the species most given to this form of mad practice. And the question is, why do they do it? What causes them to do it? Nobody really knows. There are a bunch of theories. One of the ones I think that's most interesting is the theory that one member of the group gets sick, very sick, and needs to be helped, and the others socially
tied to it for life, come up onto the beach. And when they get up onto the beach, then they die. We've got to face up to the global nature of pollution generated by the demands of advanced industrial societies and their vast urban sprawls. When land is first cleared by the burning of the rainforest, the smoke carries around the world. When an industrial plant belches toxic fumes, we all get to breathe them. We are dumping hundreds of thousands of substances into our rivers and our atmosphere. We monitor less than 50 of them, and just hope for the best with the others.
Voyager and receive this message. Enviar a todos los seres del universo un afectuoso mensaje de paz y felicidad. Darle la banda de commit the United States, and we believe, say, this committee is for you.
Are the tapes aboard the Voyager spacecraft really a testimonial to intelligent life on Earth? Is it intelligent to pollute the seas and destroy our atmosphere with chemicals which contribute to nothing but the human way of life? Will the other intelligences which Voyager hopes one day to meet accept our claims to being an advanced, caring race if the voices of whales, which are also aboard the craft, can be heard no more on Earth?
There is a message which comes from the ocean to us from whales directly. And this message is an extremely important one. What it says is that it is possible to own a brain as complex, for all I know, more complex than our own, without destroying the world. What we have to learn from that message is that what we do also must not destroy the world, or we have no future. Everything that we love, believe in, hold dear in our lives will be lost unless we change the way we think, which is, will what I'm doing diminish the ability of the environment to support life? And if so, don't do it. Whales have for all their 20 million years, that's 19 million longer than ours, they have succeeded in actually living in the world without destroying it. We could do the same.
Coming up now, answers to the questions for In the Company of Whales, Part 2. Whaling, tuna nets, and pollution threaten the future survival of whales. Whales cannot secrete toxic pollutants that enter their systems. So the chemicals accumulate in whale tissues and suppress their immune systems. Try this activity with your